Thinking about the question of how autonomous vehicles can contribute to making cities, countries more sustainable in terms of air quality, safety and so on, it's a very challenging question. There's no doubt that autonomous vehicles will contribute and that autonomous vehicles are coming, but the big challenge is on what timescale and how significantly they'll penetrate through vehicle fleets. And I think the reality is, especially for low middle income countries, it's going to be not for decades. And so it's very important not to kind of put the autonomous cart before the horse, if you see what I mean. There are technologies that we know work today. In vehicle safety, for instance, there are technologies that are crash avoidance systems like electronic stability control, and also intelligent speed adaptation is another technology that's coming. All of these are much more market ready to be deployed than full autonomous vehicles. And there is a danger that the debate about autonomy will distract us from these systems which are available here and now, and that can avoid a really horrendous prospect that, for instance, the World Bank is suggesting that on current trends, we may face between now and 2030 another 21 million deaths and over 800 million serious injuries. I mean, really horrendous numbers. And the reality is that autonomous vehicles will not have any impact on that at all. So there are some significant challenges. There are still technical challenges, there are societal challenges, how they will fit in the vehicle fleet. And the critical thing is to realize that for many decades they will share the roads with more traditional vehicles. And that also is a challenge. So yes, they have a role to play, but we need to think of how to evolve towards greater autonomy in a way that really delivers the benefits that we need in terms of safety and emissions and environmental sustainability. The question of what autonomous vehicles should do in cities and how they should work, an absolutely key challenge is, will they be shared vehicles? There's an interesting study by UC Davis that are talking about three revolutions: electrification, autonomous vehicles, but also sharing. And I think critical is the sharing element, because there is in fact a very negative scenario where, particularly in some high-income industrial countries, for example in the US, where increased use of autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles may actually be negative in terms of congestion. You can have this sort of crazy situation where you send your vehicle out to drive the streets while you're having a meeting. You could end up with, in that sense, many more journeys than needed. So sharing is going to be a very important policy recommendation to get the benefits of the kind of improvements that electrification and autonomous vehicles will bring eventually. So, certainly the challenge is, how do we make electrification really deliver in terms of air quality in cities? That's a very important question. Of course, there is a problem about electrification generally, which is how you generate the electricity. So if it's all coming from coal-fired power stations, then you're simply shifting the problem elsewhere. But nevertheless, I personally, I'm absolutely sure that there is going to be a significant place for much greater use of electric vehicles in cities. Also, hybridization, so that you're limiting the dependence on internal combustion engines as well. So I think the path towards electrification is very clear. There are still challenges about battery efficiency. There are interesting technologies. The possibility of solid-state batteries may come forward, which will help address all of that. There are some really important challenges, but in the energy mix, to get better grip on the really big problems of air quality in cities, it's absolutely clear that electrification's got to play a major role. How you do all of this is a really powerful question. The biggest challenge of all is, how do we actually really achieve sustainable transport in our rapidly growing cities? It's one of the biggest challenges, I think, facing the planet. The solutions are going to be a mix of regulatory action, regulatory push in terms of mandating better vehicle emission standards, for example, by mandating zero emissions and electric vehicles. That's going to be an important part of it. But you have to also do measures to encourage consumer uptake, consumer awareness. It's a question of regulatory push on the one hand, but demand pull on the other. You've got to give incentives to the public to want to shift their mobility patterns. And I think there are a number of clear directions there. One is that we've got to make public transport as attractive and as safe and as affordable and as efficient as possible, so that you actually remove the incentive to remain in the private vehicle. But at the same time, we've also got to make sure that private vehicles or any kind of motor vehicles do meet acceptable standards of safety and emissions and so on. So there's a kind of twin track that's needed. And I think a large part of this is going to be achieved by urban planning. The way in which we design cities, the layout of cities, is at least as important as the technology of the vehicles. And it's getting the balance right between those two. An interesting unifying theme around all of this is actually the management of speed, particularly in cities. And that's vitally important for safety and for designing roads that are really fundamentally safe for pedestrians and vulnerable road users. It also has a fuel efficiency big component, because if you're slowing vehicles down, they're using less fuel, so less emissions. So the way in which technologies that can control vehicle speed, like intelligent speed adaptation, and the fundamental layout of cities, the way that the roads are designed, those two things together can be very powerful in terms of achieving much better sustainable transport. I'm really pleased that WRI have, together with the World Bank, published its report on safe systems and sustainable transport. I think it's a magnificent report, and it's helping to consolidate a new consensus around safe systems, which is now really becoming established right across the world. A lot of countries are accepting that integration of measures that affect roads, affect vehicles, and the way people use them, integrating all of that in a coherent way with speed as a central determinant, that's absolutely vital. And the WRI report explains it really well, but most important of all is it shows that it works in low and middle income countries. So far, the safe systems approach has been almost exclusively a high income country sort of concept, but I think it's absolutely critical to persuade middle-income countries and low-income countries that are experiencing the most rapid motorisation that it's an approach that works for them too.